The service was on a Friday. I remember that detail because Eleanor had always said Fridays were for new beginnings. She'd say it every week when she'd pour her first cup of coffee and stand at the kitchen window, watching the morning come in over the backyard. "Friday, Arthur," she'd say. "Anything can happen on a Friday." I used to roll my eyes. Now I'd give anything to hear her say it one more time. We buried her in the small cemetery off Route 9, under a maple tree she had specifically requested. She'd made the arrangements herself, 2 years before she got sick, in that quiet, practical way she had about everything. She picked the plot, picked the casket, picked the readings. She even picked the flowers, white dahlias, not lilies. "Lilies are for people who want to seem sad," she told me once. "Dahlias are for people who actually are." My daughter was there. My son-in-law was there. My granddaughter, Lily, 17 years old, and the best thing in my life, stood beside me and held my hand through the whole service without saying a word. She didn't need to say anything. She knew. Afterward, we went back to the house on Birchwood Lane. People came and went. Neighbors brought casseroles. Eleanor's friend from the library brought a bottle of wine nobody opened. I sat in the armchair by the window, Eleanor's chair, and let the afternoon move around me like water around a stone. My daughter, Claire, came and sat on the footstool in front of me sometime around 4 o'clock. She had that look on her face. I recognized it from when she was 12 years old and wanted something she already knew I wasn't going to like giving her. She'd learned to soften it over the years, but I was 67. I'd had a long time to learn her face. "Dad," she said, "I know this isn't the right moment." I looked at her. I didn't say anything, but there are things we need to talk about. Practical things. The house. What comes next for you? She reached out and put her hand on my knee. "Derek and I have been talking, and we just want to make sure you're taken care of." I looked out the window. The maple in the front yard was turning. Eleanor had planted it the year Claire was born. "We can talk later," I said. "Of course," she said. "Of course. Whenever you're ready." She patted my knee and went back to the kitchen. I heard her say something to Derek in a low voice. I didn't hear what. I didn't try to. I stayed in Eleanor's chair until everyone was gone. Her name had been Eleanor Marsh before she became Eleanor Calloway, and she had been, without any competition, the most quietly remarkable person I had ever known. We met when I was 24, and she was 22. I was working at a surveying firm in Portland. She was teaching 3rd grade at a school in Scarborough and writing in the evenings. I didn't know about the writing at first. She didn't tell people about it the way some people announce things about themselves. Eleanor didn't announce. She simply did. I found out about the first book by accident. We'd been together about 8 months. I was looking for a pen in her desk drawer, and I found a folder of typed pages with a letter clipped to the front from a literary agency in New York. The letter said they were pleased to offer representation. She came out of the bathroom and caught me holding it. I expected embarrassment. Instead, she just tilted her head and said, "I was going to tell you." When? When there was something to tell. That was Eleanor. She didn't count things until they were real. She didn't celebrate until there was something solid in her hands. In 43 years of marriage, I watched her publish 9 novels, win 2 regional awards, be reviewed in publications she kept in a box under the bed, and never once brought out to show anyone. The books weren't bestsellers. They were the kind of books that found their readers slowly, over years, passed from hand to hand, and left on the shelves of vacation rentals and waiting rooms. She was proud of that. She said the best kind of reader was one who found you when they needed you, not one who found you because everyone told them to. The royalties had always been modest, enough to matter, not enough to change anything. That was what I thought. That was what I thought until 3 weeks after the funeral, when I sat down with Robert Haynes, her literary agent of the last 20 years, on a video call that Eleanor had arranged before she died, and instructed him not to initiate until I was ready. She had known me well enough to know I would need a few weeks before I could sit still for the numbers. Robert was a thin, careful man with reading glasses he wore on a chain. He expressed his condolences with what felt like genuine feeling. Then he shared his screen. Eleanor's backlist had been licensed to an audiobook platform 18 months ago, a significant platform, the kind that had subscribers the way rivers have water, The deal had been structured as a revenue share, not a flat fee, and the first royalty statement under the new arrangement had come in the month before she died. I sat there looking at the number. "Is this per year?" I asked. "Quarterly," Robert said. "That's the quarterly figure." I did the math slowly, like I was afraid of the answer. "She knew?" I said. "She signed the contract herself," he said. "She was very clear about how she wanted this handled. She asked me to explain everything to you after she was gone." He paused. "She said, and I'm quoting here, 'Arthur will need to see it in writing before he believes it. Show him everything.'" I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. It sounded strange in the room, like a sound from another life. "She also asked me to tell you," Robert continued, "that she was sorry she didn't explain all of this sooner. She said she kept meaning to. And then she didn't want to talk about money while she was sick. And then..." He stopped. "And then she ran out of time," I said. "Yes." I thanked him. I closed the laptop. I sat in the study for a long time, surrounded by her books in their rows on the shelves, the spines facing out in the order she'd put them, which was not alphabetical and not chronological, but some system only she had ever understood. I never rearranged them. I still haven't. Claire called 2 days later. She had a way of spacing things out that she thought was strategic. She'd learned it from her mother, actually, but she used it differently. Eleanor spaced things out because she was thoughtful. Claire spaced things out because she was calculating. I don't say that to be cruel. It's just a fact I'd had to make my peace with over the years. My daughter loved me the way some people love a house they grew up in, with possessiveness and without much thought for what it was like to live inside. "Dad, how are you doing? Are you eating?" "I'm eating. I worry about you in that house by yourself. It's such a big house for one person." "It's not that big, Claire. 3 bedrooms, Dad." "You're one person. I know how many bedrooms I have." A pause. I heard her breathe in the way she did before she changed direction. "Derek and I have been looking at some options. There's a community. It's not a nursing home. It's really more like a resort, honestly about 20 minutes from us in Westbrook. We toured it last week. The apartments are beautiful. They have a pool, Dad. And activities. And people your age." I let her finish. "I'm 67, I said. "I know how old you are. The minimum age at most of those places is 75. Sometimes 80. This one is 62 and up. It's quite progressive." I looked out the kitchen window. The maple was still turning. In another week, it would be at its peak. "I'm not interested," I said. "Dad..." "Claire, I buried your mother 3 weeks ago. I'm not making any decisions about my life right now. I'd appreciate it if you could give me some time." Another pause, longer this time. "Of course," she said. "Of course. I'm sorry. I just worry." "I know you do," I said. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that her worry and my welfare were 2 different things, and she sometimes confused one for the other. She came to the house the following Saturday with Derek. I made coffee. Derek walked around the first floor with his hands in his pockets, in a way that made me feel like a real estate agent who hadn't been asked to be there. Derek was not a bad man. He was a man who believed that all problems were organizational problems, and that all organizational problems had efficient solutions. Eleanor had called him a human flowchart once, not unkindly, the way you'd describe a personality type rather than a flaw. He worked in logistics. He liked things to move in the right direction at the right time. "This is a great house, Arthur," he said, standing in the dining room, looking up at the ceiling, molding the way a buyer looks at a ceiling. "Great bones." "Thank you," I said. "You know what a house like this would go for in this market?" "I have a sense." He told me the number anyway. He'd clearly looked it up. Claire came in from the kitchen with her coffee and sat at the dining room table, and I understood that this was the conversation they had driven 45 minutes to have. "We've been thinking," Claire said, "that it might make sense for you to consider selling. Not to move into a facility, necessarily. Just to simplify. Maybe something smaller, closer to us. A condo in Westbrook. You wouldn't have to deal with the yard, the maintenance, and you'd have the liquidity." "Liquidity for what?" "For whatever you need. Travel, security." She looked at her hands. "Care, eventually. Medical care can be expensive, Dad. Mom's last 2 years were expensive." That was true. I didn't argue it. "I'll think about it," I said. And I was thinking about it. just not in the way they meant. Eleanor and I had bought the house on Birchwood Lane in 1989. It was the house where we raised Claire, where we fixed the furnace 6 times and repainted the kitchen 4 times and replaced the roof twice. I had built the raised garden beds in the backyard myself, from lumber I bought at the hardware store on a Saturday in April with a 2-year-old Claire strapped to my back. Eleanor had planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs I couldn't name, every spring for 30 years. The garden was still there. I hadn't touched it since August. There was something else, though, something Claire didn't know about, that I had almost forgotten about myself until Robert Haynes mentioned it at the end of our call, almost as an afterthought. "Oh," he'd said, "I should also mention there's the matter of the Pemaquid property." I had gone very still. Eleanor purchased it about 6 years ago. She asked me to help facilitate the paperwork since you were traveling for work that month. She intended to tell you. I assumed she had. She hadn't. He'd looked uncomfortable. It's a small cottage. Nothing grand. About a mile off the main road outside of Pemaquid Point. She said she wanted somewhere to write when she needed quiet. She used it, I believe, several times a year. He paused. She told me once it was where she did her best thinking. I had sat with that for 3 weeks. A cottage I had never seen. A place she had gone, alone, to think. A room of her own, extended into a whole small building by the ocean. I wasn't hurt by it. I understood it completely. Eleanor had always needed pockets of solitude. She wasn't built for constant companionship the way some people are. She loved me, and she needed, occasionally, to be somewhere I wasn't. I had always known this about her. I just hadn't known about the cottage. I drove out to see it the week after Claire and Derek's visit. Route 130 south from Damariscotta runs down a peninsula until the land runs out. I'd driven it before, years ago, whale watching with Claire when she was small. The trees on either side of the road were full autumn color, orange and red, and the kind of deep gold that seems too good to be accidental. I followed the address Robert had given me down a gravel drive that turned through a stand of birch trees and opened onto a clearing. The cottage was small, white clapboard, green shutters, a screened porch facing south. It sat on a low bluff above the water, maybe 50 yards from the ledge where the ground dropped down to the sea. I could hear the waves before I got out of the car. The key was where Robert said it would be, inside a ceramic pot by the porch steps. I let myself in. It was Eleanor everywhere. There was a worn blue armchair angled toward the window, and a small table beside it with a ring stain from a mug. There were bookshelves on 2 walls, packed with paperbacks, other people's books, writers she admired, writers she'd been in conversation with for years in the privacy of her own reading. There was a small kitchen with a kettle and a French press, and a tin of her tea on the counter. There was a writing desk with a yellow legal pad. The top page was blank. I don't know why that made me feel the way it did, but I stood there for a long time looking at it. I walked out to the porch and sat in the wooden chair that faced the water. It was a clear day, cold enough that I could see my breath, and the ocean out past the ledge was deep blue, the kind of blue that looks like it goes all the way down to the center of the earth. A few lobster boats moved in the distance. I thought about Eleanor sitting here, writing here, thinking here, the books that had come out of this quiet. I thought about Claire and Derek in my dining room, talking about liquidity. I thought about what Eleanor had set up without telling me, quietly, the way she did everything. And I thought about the fact that she had left me enough money, quarterly, to live anywhere I wanted for the rest of my life. I sat on that porch until the light changed. Then I went inside and made tea with her kettle, and sat in her blue chair, and did the kind of thinking you can only do when you're somewhere completely still. By the time I drove back to Portland, I knew what I was going to do. I called Claire the following Monday and told her I'd been thinking about what she said. I told her she was right that the house was a lot for one person. I told her I was open to talking. I heard the relief in her voice immediately, the particular kind of relief that sounds like something finally going according to plan. She and Derek came back that weekend. We sat at the dining room table again. This time Derek had a folder. The house, he explained, was in both my name and Eleanor's. With Eleanor gone, it passed to me entirely. They wanted to discuss options. They had, apparently, consulted a real estate attorney. The attorney had advised, and Derek said this carefully, the way you say a thing when you've rehearsed it, that from an estate planning perspective, it might be advantageous for me to consider gifting the property while I was living rather than passing it through probate. The tax benefits, Derek said, were significant. I looked at him. You want me to sign the house over to you? I said. Not to us, Claire said quickly. Into a family trust. That includes you. You'd still have rights to the property. Would I be living in it? A small pause. That's something we'd figure out together, she said. If you were somewhere more appropriate for your needs, you might not need the house. And it would be protected for Lily eventually. For our grandchildren, someday. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. This is about protecting the family, Dad. It's what Mom would have wanted. I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about Eleanor at the cottage in the blue chair. I thought about what Eleanor would have actually wanted. Let me talk to my attorney, I said. My attorney was a man named Phil Garrett, who had been handling my affairs for 15 years, and who had the useful quality of being unsentimental and direct. I told him everything. He listened without expression. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. What do you want to do? He said. I want to know what my options are first. He told me. He was thorough. He asked about the royalties, which surprised him, and about the cottage, which surprised him more. When he had all the information, he was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, you're under no obligation to sign anything. I know that. They can't force a transfer. They can't compel you to do anything with your own property. I know that too. He looked at me. So what are you thinking? I told him what I was thinking. He nodded slowly. He asked a few clarifying questions. He made some notes. At the end, he said, That's actually quite clean. Eleanor set this up well. She set everything up well, I said. I just didn't always know about it. He smiled, the small professional smile of a man who has heard many family stories and is good at keeping them to himself. I asked Claire and Derek to come back the following Saturday. I told Claire I'd made a decision. Again, I heard that relief. They arrived at 10 in the morning. I had coffee ready. I had Phil's paperwork on the table. I had also, the night before, had a long conversation with my granddaughter Lily, who was old enough to understand most things and honest enough to tell me what she actually thought. She'd listened to everything I said, and at the end she just looked at me and said, Grandpa, do whatever makes you happy. That's what Grandma would say. And then she'd hug me for a long time, the kind of hug that teenage girls give when they've temporarily forgotten that they're teenagers. Claire sat across from me. Derek sat beside her. They both looked at the paperwork on the table with the contained eagerness of people trying not to look eager. I've thought about it, I said. You're right that the house is too big for me. You're right that it makes sense to simplify. I picked up the folder and slid it across the table. I'm signing Birchwood Lane over to you. Full transfer. No conditions. Claire's eyes widened. She hadn't expected full transfer. She'd expected negotiation. Derek opened the folder. He scanned it. His expression did something complicated. This is he started. The house, I said. Free and clear. Phil has handled everything. You just need to sign as recipients. Claire looked up at me. Dad, this is. She stopped. Her eyes were wet. This is incredibly generous. I want you to have it, I said. And that was true. I did want them to have it. What I didn't mention, sitting at that table, was what Phil had quietly confirmed the week before. That the deferred maintenance on the house had reached a number I had been avoiding looking at for 2 years. The foundation had issues. The electrical panel was original to 1,962. The roof I'd replaced was showing problems in the underlayment that the inspector had flagged. There was a remediation situation in the basement from a slow leak that had gone undetected the winter Eleanor was sick. The house on Birchwood Lane was, underneath its good bones and its real estate market value, an expensive and complicated problem that would take years and a significant amount of money to resolve before it could be cleanly sold. I had been aware of this in the way that people are aware of things they love that are deteriorating. I hadn't dealt with it because I hadn't wanted to deal with it. And because Eleanor had been sick, and then because Eleanor had been gone, and because there had always been something more immediate. But now it was Derek and Claire's problem. And I wish them well with it. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't acting out of bitterness. I wasn't trying to hurt them exactly. What I was trying to do was respond honestly to a situation in which they had shown me, clearly and without meaning to, what our relationship was made of. When my wife was 3 weeks in the ground and they came to my house with a real estate attorney's advice and a folder of paperwork, they had told me something. I was listening. Eleanor had also been listening, I think, for longer than I had. She had made arrangements. She had thought things through. She had built a life that would continue to be good after everything changed, and she had done it quietly and without drama, and she had left me the instructions in the form of a literary agent's phone number and a key in a ceramic pot. I trusted her. I always had. I was still trusting her. I spent 3 weeks going through the house. I took what was mine and Eleanor's together, the photographs, the furniture we'd chosen, the books that were mine, her jewelry in the wooden box her mother had given her, the yellow legal pad from the cottage desk that I still hadn't been able to bring myself to open. I arranged for the rest to stay with the house. I called a moving company that did small, careful moves for people who didn't have much to move. I called Phil and had him handle the notification to Claire and Derek about the maintenance issues once the transfer was complete. I felt they deserved to know what they were inheriting in full, and Phil could deliver that information more cleanly than I could. I drove down to Pemaquid on a Thursday. October, deep into it now, the trees mostly bare along Route 130. The ones still holding leaves were doing it stubbornly, the last bright red ones against a gray sky. I rolled down the window and drove slowly. I turned down the gravel drive. The birches were bare. The cottage was exactly as I'd left it. I unlocked the door and brought in the first load of boxes and stood in the middle of the small living room looking at Eleanor's bookshelves. I put my books next to hers. It looked right. Lily came down the weekend after I moved in. She drove herself. She'd just gotten her license and was very solemn about the responsibility of it in a way that made me want to laugh and never let on. She came in and stood in the middle of the cottage and looked at everything and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Grandpa, this is perfect." "Your grandmother thought so," I said. "Can I see the water?" We went out to the porch together. The ocean was slate-colored under a cloudy sky, the lobster boats out in the distance, the ledge below us wet from the tide. Lily leaned on the porch railing and breathed in the cold, salt air the way young people do when they're somewhere new, taking it in like they're deciding whether they belong there. "Mom called me," she said, "about the house." The problems with the house? I figured she would. She was upset. I nodded. I looked out at the water. She said you knew about the problems. I did. She thinks you did it on purpose. I did, I said. Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "Do you feel bad about it?" I thought about the question seriously, the way she deserved. "Not about the house," I said. "I feel bad that things got to the point where it seemed like the right thing to do. I feel bad that your mother and I are." I paused. "I feel bad about what we've become to each other. But no, not about the house." Lily nodded. She was quiet again. "I think Grandma would have done the same thing," she said finally. "I think so too." We stood there on the porch until it got too cold, and then I made tea, and she told me about school, and I listened the way I always did, happy just to hear her voice fill up the small rooms. Robert sent the next quarterly statement in November. I opened it at the desk by the window, with the ocean visible between the bare branches of the 2 spruce trees at the property edge. Eleanor had planted those too, apparently. Robert had mentioned it on our last call. She'd asked a local landscaper to put them in the second year she had the cottage for privacy and windbreak. I looked at the number on the statement. It was, if anything, slightly higher than the previous quarter. The audiobook platform had reported another strong period. One of Eleanor's middle books, the 4th one, the quiet one about a woman returning to her hometown, had apparently been featured in someone's online reading list, and had experienced what Robert called a meaningful discovery spike. He sounded pleased in a professional way. I was pleased in an entirely different way. I folded the statement and put it in the desk drawer with the others. Outside, the spruce trees moved in the November wind. The ocean beyond them was dark and constant and made no particular promise to be anything other than what it was. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I stood at the window and drank it. It was a Friday. "Eleanor," I thought, "you were right. Anything can happen on a Friday." Claire called in December, the first time we'd spoken since Phil had delivered the maintenance report. It was a stiff conversation, careful on both sides. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. She said Derek had gotten estimates on the foundation work. I said that sounded expensive. She agreed that it was. There was a silence. I didn't know you were moving to a cottage, she said. I thought it would suit me. I didn't even know you had a cottage. Neither did I said. For a while, another silence. Dad, can I ask you something? You can ask. Are you happy? I mean, genuinely. Is this what you wanted? I looked out through the screened porch at the late afternoon light on the water. The sun came down over the land to the southwest and caught the surface of the ocean in a particular way, in the afternoons that I had started to look forward to, the way I used to look forward to other things. Coffee in the maido, morning, the end of a long day, Eleanor's footsteps on the stairs. Yes, I said, this is what I wanted. She didn't say anything for a moment. I'm sorry, she said then, about how things were. After Mom, I handled it wrong. You did, I said. But I understand it. You were scared. People do difficult things when they're scared. Were you scared? I thought about standing at Eleanor's grave on a Friday in October, the white dahlias on the fresh earth, Lily's hand in mine. Terrified, I said. Still am some days, but I'm in the right place for it. She asked if she could come visit sometime. I said yes, of course. I meant it. I wasn't finished with my daughter. I wasn't finished with any of it. The story of a family doesn't end because one chapter went badly. It just keeps going, in new rooms, in new light. I went out to the porch after we hung up. The last of the afternoon sun was going. The spruce trees were dark against the orange sky. Somewhere out past the ledge, a seal surfaced and went back under. I sat down in the wooden chair and stayed there until the stars came out, which took a while, and was worth it. Eleanor had known about the stars here. She had known about all of it, the chair, the morning kettle, the tide coming in at dusk, the royalties arriving like letters from a life she'd been building quietly for 40 years while I rolled my eyes every Friday at her optimism. She had known, and now I knew, and the ocean didn't care either way, and that was, I had decided, entirely enough.